Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to film a Friday Reads video, which I don't very often get to do, but I had to work a short day today for my job, so I figured I would use the extra time, the extra free time, to film a Friday Reads because I have read some books. I am currently in the middle of reading some books, and I have some other things that I wanted to talk to you all about. So first of all, I want to say thank you to everyone who has reached out to me in the wake of the horrific mass shooting that has happened here in my home state of Maine. It's horrible and it's awful, and it's horrible and awful every time it happens. The shooter is still at large as I film this, and that is causing a lot of stress and heartache around the state. Certain areas of the state are still in, shelter in place type restrictions. Law enforcement of all levels is out looking for the shooter, and my deepest sympathies go out to all the victims of this horrible, horrible event. And I'm sad and I'm mad, and I don't really want to talk about it in political terms or any other terms really, other than to say I really appreciate everybody who has reached out to me about it. It's really meant a lot. Even though I live quite far away from where this happened, Maine is a large state in geography, but a small state in terms of population. We really all just sort of feel like we all belong to one small town, and everybody knows somebody. So yeah. It's very awful, and thank you very much for your very kind words and thoughts and all of that to me and my family. So I would like to tell you about the one book that I have finished since the last time I've made a video, and that is a very large book, very suitable for October and the spooky season. This is Fairy Tale by Stephen King, another chunker from the guy who really likes to write long books, and also beloved Maine author. I'm a huge Stephen King fan. I always read his books. I try not to read them immediately when they come out because I always want to have one Stephen King book waiting in the wings, and his new book Holly has been published so I can safely read Fairy Tale. And I read this a combination of the physical book and audiobook, and I do highly recommend the audiobook. It's really, really a fun production. And Stephen King himself makes an appearance in that production, which is super fun. And I will also say that this physical copy is great because at the start of each chapter, there is an illustration, and it sort of harkens back to the old style of putting illustrations at the beginning of the chapters in the book from the 18th century. And so I love that, and it really added to my enjoyment of this book. This is another fantasy novel from Stephen King. He doesn't always write fantasy, but I would say this leans more towards the fantasy fiction versus horror fiction. I did not find this to be particularly scary, although there were some gross bits, as there always are with a Stephen King book. And Stephen King also does in this book what he tends to do, which is basically write two stories in one. So you have a very long sort of first section of the book that's sort of one story, and then the book kind of changes and you go into the second part of the story. So this is the story of Charlie, who is a 17-year-old teenager, and who does a good deed for a neighbor. He finds an old man lying in his backyard. He's broken his hip. I think it was his hip, or maybe it was his knee. I can't remember. And his dog is freaking out, and Charlie helps this man. And in the process of helping him, calling 911 and getting the ambulance there, this is all present day, Charlie forms a relationship with this man and begins to cement that relationship by helping to take care of him as he convalesces. And he really forms an attachment to the man's old German Shepherd. And that relationship with the German Shepherd really is at the heart of this story. And so we get that part of the story, and then at some certain point, the story changes and we get into the fantastical. And Charlie has to go on a quest and battle evil and all of that stuff. And this book takes on fairy tale tropes and a lot of our, what we've what we know of fairy tales and sort of harkens back to like their dark origin stories, and also sort of takes the mickey out of the Disneyfication of fairy tales. And so it is, like I said, it's a fantasy quest story. It is the story of a boy and his dog. It is, for all you dog lovers out there and people like me who fear that something bad will happen to the dog, never fear. Stephen King will not hurt you in that regard. I don't want to say anything more about it other than that, because I think it's just a fun story. I will say there are some decisions that King makes at the end of the story that I sort of rolled my eyes at a little bit. And there were also some plot holes, I think, that I was like, well, why wouldn't you just do this other thing rather than this convoluted thing? So I think it's not my favorite Stephen King, but it was an excellent time. I really enjoyed myself while I was in the midst of this story. And so that's what I want from my Stephen King stories. He writes great characters, he can tell a good story, and I was highly entertained throughout. So that was a success, as always, when I read Stephen King. And that's the only thing I've completed since my last recent reads video, but I am in the middle of 5 books. So the only fiction that I'm in process with right now is my Victober read. This is The Prime Minister, sorry for the glare, which is book number 5 in the Palliser series, and this is by Anthony Trollope. So this is really good. I am really enjoying this story. This is a further tales of Plantagenet Palliser and his wife, Lady Glencora, who is one of my favorite characters in the whole series. He has now been made prime minister, and he has to run the government, and that is not what he really wants to do. He really would just like to go back to his decimal coinage and, work on this small problem by himself without having to do the politicizing, do the handshaking and the socializing and all that kind of stuff that you have to do when you're a politician. And Lady Glencora is very different from her husband, and she immediately jumps in both feet to the social aspect of this task that's been set before them. And they are battling it out over how they should approach his political career, and it's wonderful, and I love it. And there is a secondary storyline with a young lady who marries against her father's wishes to this, what's his name? I've already forgotten his name. Why can I not remember his name? Lopez. She marries Lopez, and that plot ensues. Has she made a mistake? Is he really an adventurer, or is he really the man that she thinks he is? And there is, of course, a jilted lover from her past that is in this sort of triangle story. And that's a really good storyline. I'm very much enjoying that. And so Trollope, I think, is doing great things in this book. I'm liking it a lot more than I did Phineas Redux. So about halfway through this, I've just started book 2. So I'm halfway through with that. I am buddy reading with Britta Buller this nonfiction, Dopesick Dealers, Doctors, and the Drug Company That Addicted America by Beth Macy. This is the sort of book 3 in my trifecta reading about the opioid crisis in Appalachia. And I had started reading this last summer and then set it aside to do other reading. And then Britta and I decided to pick it up and read it together. So I went back to the beginning and I reread the first 100 pages. And we've now, we've moved on to part 2 of this nonfiction documentation of the progression of opioid addiction, in particular in Virginia, from the mid to late 90s through the early 2000s, and now we're into 2010, 2012. And it's just horrible to see the progression from, kids trading pills at parties to becoming heroin addicts. So yeah, and this book, takes on Purdue Farmer, talks about that stuff that was more deeply addressed in Empire Pain, which I read already. And you can see that Barbara Kingsolver must have read this book before she wrote Demon Copperhead, because there are a lot of things that I first read about in her novel earlier this year, and that are being delved into more deeply and explained in a factual way in this book. So far, it's gripping. It's really well written, very excellent investigative journalism. Very much enjoying, I wouldn't say enjoying because it's a terrible topic, but getting a lot out of this read so far. And now I have two more nonfiction to talk about that are sort of adventure nonfiction. The first one is another buddy read. This is The Wager, A Tale of Shipwreck, Mutiny, and Murder by David Grann. This has been everywhere, and for good reason. This is excellent narrative nonfiction. I'm buddy reading this with Patrice, Karen, and Doris, my nonfiction buddy readers, and we are just having such a great time talking about this. This tells the tale of the ship, The Wager, which was part of a squadron of warships that set out from Great Britain in the early 1700s, in like 1740s, I think this takes place in 1740s. And their mission is to sail to South America, sail around the Cape of Good Hope. Is it Cape of Good Hope? I always mix up that one with the one at the bottom of Africa. Anyway, they have to sail around the tip of South America, the southern tip of South America, and find a Spanish galleon that is loaded with gold and things that they've heard of. So these 5 ships set out, and they encounter horrible conditions on the ocean, and the Wager is lost and ends up shipwrecked. So we've read the first part, which is all about the voyage across the Atlantic and what happens to them when they reach the tip of South America, and excellent information included about what it was like to sail on these ships back in the 1700s, what was known then about navigation, which was not much, how supplies were loaded, how many men were on these ships, what kind of men they were. Talks a lot about how people were pressed into service on these ships. And we're also learning about the individuals who were on these ships, one of whom, which is so interesting, who was on the Wager, is Lord Byron's grandfather, who was only a teenager at the time, was a midshipman on the Wager. And we've just gotten to the point of the story where they're shipwrecked. And then what's going to come after that is a tale of what happens to them after the shipwreck, and how the people that survive have different stories to tell about what actually happened on the Wager. So far, really, really enjoying this book. So much information, but told in a way that is very interesting and keeps you really engaged with the story, and also is like super claustrophobic and atmospheric and like just unrelenting in the horrible things that are happening to these people and these ships. So very much enjoying that. And then I have just started River of Gods, Genius, Courage, and Betrayal in the Search for the Source of the Nile by Candice Millard. And this one takes place in the 1800s with explorers who are trying to find the headwaters of the Nile River. And I've just begun this. I am only on page 30 of this. This is the Book Naturalist book club read for the month of October. So my goal is to finish this weekend. We shall see. And then last but not least, one last nonfiction book that I am reading, another buddy read, this time with Sean the Book Maniac. I am reading Perfection of the Morning by Sharon Butala. This is her memoir of getting married and moving to southwestern Saskatchewan in the prairies, the shortgrass prairies. Her husband is a rancher, and it's her story of leaving a professional life as an academic and a professor and moving to this remote ranch where in the 70s, where she is very primitive lifestyle and she knows nothing about living a ranch life or a farm life and fish out of water, but also her incredible immediate attachment and love of the prairie. Her nature writing is chef's kiss, like so beautiful, really interesting too, to learn about what it was like, the conditions were like in that region of Canada in that time period, like no electricity, no running water, no indoor bathrooms, like all these things, and how this woman who had been living in Saskatoon and teaching at the university, who had all the modern amenities, adjusts to this. And like leaving her girlfriend, she had a really strong group of girlfriends, who told each other everything. She is, I should say, she is divorced too. So she was a divorcee. She lived a worldly life, you know, and she had this support group of friends. And then she moves to this very remote place, and she does not fit in with the other ladies who have no time to like hang out anyway, because they're farm wives and they're, you know, hard at work to like sustain life in this area, and how she manages that. Her husband's gone a lot, off on horseback, like traveling with the cattle and all these kinds of things. It's just really, really good. And she's not a flowery writer at all. It's just very evocative and very sort of, she's just very spot on in her details. And so it brings it to life. You can really see it in your mind's eye. And I'm very much enjoying that. So that's a great buddy read as well. So lots of nonfiction on the go as I head into Nonfiction November, which is always good. Although I will be finishing up Perfection of the Morning this weekend. I'm hoping to finish River of the Gods this weekend, and make good progress in Dopesick and The Wager as well. So we'll see. Hoping to get some of these finished up by the end of October so that I can head into Nonfiction November with a mostly clean slate. Thank you all for watching. I hope you're all doing well and finding some great books to read. I will talk to you later.